Hello and welcome to another episode of Other Record Labels. I'm your host, Scott Orr. Thanks so much for listening. If you're new to the podcast, make sure you go back and check out other episodes. Lots of great stuff in there. Much like today, we interview the founder of 12K Records, Taylor Dupree. Taylor is, a lot of you might know him, he's a really well-known, world-renowned electronic musician and ambient music producer who's run this label for quite some time. And while I'm talking, you can check them out at 12k.com. That's 12k.com. You can check out their roster and some of their releases, a little bit about the label, as well as Taylor's mastering suite. He's a mastering engineer, and we talk a lot about that as well, why that's important for DIY musicians to consider mastering. And he has a beautiful mastering suite with some incredible gear. So if you're a gear nerd, we're going to be touching on that a little bit as well. We also share an artist, and that's a really cool part of the story. Is there's a ambient pedal steel player by the name of M. Grigg who started at our label Other Songs with 3 EPs, and just recently has signed to Taylor's label 12K Records for a full length, which is coming out in a couple weeks. And so that's a really cool connection, and we go into that a little bit as well. So make sure you check it out. One thing to note before you guys send me any letters here, the irony with Taylor being such an audiophile and some of his fans, we had some technical difficulties on this episode, so please forgive me. I think Taylor was using a USB mic, and there might have been some sort of cell phone interference or a loose cable, but the USB mic cuts out every maybe about 4 or 5 times in this episode for just a few seconds. And then at that point, I hop over to the Skype audio. And so you'll notice that a little bit, and hopefully I've tried to crossfade it nicely so it's not too obvious, but forgive me for that. Otherwise, this was a ton of fun for me to talk with Taylor, and I think you're really going to enjoy it.
But hey, first of all, it's nice to meet you.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. It's great. I'm just so stoked to be talking to you, and I really appreciate you doing this. Very honored.
Yeah, thanks for thinking of me. I'm equally honored.
As soon as M. Grigg, who is our connection, so to speak, he mentioned you probably about a year ago now, and the first thing, and so when I was like kind of diving into your catalog, I was like, oh man, I want to interview this guy because the podcast was just launching a year ago, and I was like, well, I don't want to step on Mike's toes. So I waited a little while to contact you.
Oh, no. Yeah, no, that's cool. No problem.
I mean, M. Grigg is so great. And I don't know, this episode will probably come out sometime early 2019. But I know you guys are working on a project together, and that's super exciting.
Yeah. His release is done. It's been mastered. And his wife is doing the cover art.
Right, I saw that. That's awesome.
But I've got a couple other things coming out like January, February, so I think we're going to do his in March.
Okay, cool. That's cool. He's such a talented artist.
Yeah, I love it. I love slide, like lap steel slide guitar. And
yeah, it really can. And I love when we first did something together back on Field Notes, I was kind of thinking things would be like very Bill Frisell and kind of this like, and it is, and his and the thing we did with him with Mill Pond is kind of that way too. But he gets some really unique ambient sounds that you would just never have thought, with looping and with different effects and stuff that you would never thought could come from a dobro or a steel.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big Daniel Lanois fan.
Totally.
But Lanois, as much of a master as he is, his like solo steel stuff is never quite ambient enough for me. Like I always wish it was just like a little spacier, a little,
right.
And Mike's stuff like hits that.
Yeah.
And I've wanted to work with a, lap steel player or release something or something. So this has been like great for me to find his music.
Well, and I mean, the Daniel Lanois is pretty unique in the sense that for most lap steel players, and there actually are some younger guys coming up playing lap steel now, but a lot of them are kind of hanging out in that alt country genre. So very few are plugging into pedals, or spacey pedals, and experimenting.
Yeah. It's great.
I love. Let's dive into this. I have so many questions here, and I don't want to take too much of your time, but at the same time, I really do. I love what your label's bio says about fusing the technological with the organic, in respect to your label's sound and the aesthetic. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely something that evolved over many years. I mean, when I started the label, I was sort of transitioning out of my own work as doing techno mostly.
Okay.
And that coming from industrial and just super electronic, I was just so into the hyper synthetic, just electronic sounds.
Yeah.
And, it was all futuristic and cyberpunk and, nothing at all, natural or anything. I just wanted to be completely synthetic. But I don't know. I mean, I think after a big thing was moving out of Brooklyn to where we live now, which is very rural.
Okay.
And I've always liked the outdoors. I've always been like a kind of a nature lover, but it was never really in my art. And I think moving out here and living in it and just getting older and, I don't know, trying to find my own voice or something, it all just slowly kind of crept in. And, all of a sudden I found myself releasing stuff with guitars in it, that if the 20-year-old me had told the 35-year-old me that I'd be doing that, I would have never believed him, or the other way around, whatever. But,
right.
It's like,
yeah.
And then I don't know, you as an artist or a creator, you just kind of evolve and you find tangents that you go off on for years, And for me, it was really this idea of the unpredictability of nature and the decay of nature and the imperfectness of nature.
Totally.
And then trying to, I think maybe definitely a backlash against the hyper synthetic stuff I'd been doing.
Right.
And it maybe a little bit initiated by sort of the glitch movement of the early 2000s.
Okay.
Where you're trying to find, artists are trying to break the digital,
Right.
Trying to find how to break digital, how to make it sound like a mistake. It was still super electronic sounding, but you're, trying to take that digitalness and make it imperfect somehow.
Right. I think that's so important because when it's 100% digital, then somebody else can replicate what you've done using the same tools. But when they can't replicate the sound of nature outside of your studio or,
Yeah, sure.
Some sort of, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I have nothing against the artists who are doing stuff, that sound completely digital, I listen to a lot of that stuff, but I guess, we're always, I don't know. I mean, always evolving. And
are there similarities? Are there parallels between digital and organic? Do they mimic each other in any way?
No, I don't know. I think people are certainly trying to. I mean, just on the surface, you've got, from a technical point of view, you've got synths and sample libraries trying to sound
right.
as real as possible, and technology constantly trying to improve and replicate and mimic real life. But I mean, I don't know, from a purely artistic point of view, I'm not sure if I sort of see them as opposite ends of a spectrum.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
mean, just off the head, I'm sure there are parallels, but
You've kind of become, you've been doing this for a long time, over 20 years, with the label. Uh, you've become this respected curator in this genre. What do you find so compelling about ambient music and minimalism in sound design?
Well, I mean, ambient music is, for lack of a better term, I'm not terribly fond of the name.
Okay.
As a genre name. I think a lot of people outside the music world might mistake that for new age.
Right. No, that's fair. Yeah.
It's hard to find, the term, unlike techno, which is, there's 5,000 subgenres of techno.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's no subgenres of ambient music.
Right.
Maybe the word drone, maybe drone is a subgenre, but I don't even know what that means. So you say ambient and it just covers so much, so many different sounds. Mm-hmm. But in terms of what draws me to it, I don't know. I mean, it's what I do. It's who I am. It started in the mid 80s when a friend of mine played me Eno's Thursday Afternoon.
Right.
Which to this day is my favorite recording of all time. And I think, when I heard that for the first time, I had heard nothing like it before. I mean, that's a later piece of his in terms of his ambient work, but that's the first ambient music I'd ever heard.
And what kind of music were you doing at that time before you had heard that?
That was, 85, 86. It was New Order and new wave and early industrial of the time.
Right.
A lot of early OMD and New Order, Cocteau Twins, that kind of thing. But so I don't know. I mean, that hearing Thursday Afternoon, just little did I know it at the time, completely changed my life. And as I grew up writing, this kind of late 80s kind of music and industrial and then techno, I guess at some point that ambient bug was always inside me and just started bubbling up as I got, realized I had no interest in being a DJ or playing at clubs or playing to eat out teenagers or, and trying to find my own voice. And I guess something more ambient was it. But as you said earlier, or as you asked earlier about minimalism, I think the two kind of came up at the same time, because as I was sort of struggling to find out who I was musically, I was sort of living in New York City at the time. I was sort of introduced to a lot of minimalist artists and architecture.
Okay.
And just really blown away by that in the same way that I was by Eno's music. I just never seen or experienced art like that. It just had, for whatever reason these things do to someone, it just had a big impact on me. And, whether consciously or not, I guess I decided to kind of blend all that together and see where it took me,
I find minimalism is so interesting in electronic music or ambient music or whatever term we're going to have to settle on today. But I find it interesting because, and I want to ask you what it means to you in this genre, because to me it refers to some sort of restraint, because you have so many different options and so many different tools to shape a sound, but you have to hold back. It's like, picking one delicious thing at a buffet and ignoring everything else. We don't say that Bruce Springsteen on Broadway is minimal. You don't usually use the term minimal to describe just a solo violinist or a guitar player. But what does minimalism mean to you in electronic music or in ambient music?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think it touches on a lot of different parts of the process to me. I didn't come to minimalist music through the traditional minimalists, like Steve Reich, or I heard those guys much later. So I kind of, when I was trying to create music that was influenced by minimalism, the minimalism I was being influenced by was visual art.
Oh, okay.
So it was sort of, I mean, exactly as you said, it was a restraint. It was kind of a restraint of materials and repetition. I mean, the minimalist composers use this stuff too, but I hadn't heard them yet. So
Right.
It was sort of, a lot of it was repetition. It was sort of pureness of form. So when you take that into music, like you said, it's a more restricted palette. It's with all the endless options that we have in the studio. It's a way to force yourself to be a little more focused. But in the end, I mean, I'm also not interested in any part of my life in any sort of extraneous decoration or, if you come to my house, it's sort of as minimal, minimalism and modern as you can get when you have two young boys running around. But, but it's, I'm not.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good
there's
point.
A lot of things, I'm not into decoration for decoration's sake. It's I want things to be functional and beautiful. And, and I think the music is that way too. And when you have music that isn't, loaded with flourishes, that are only there for flourish sake, it leaves it a lot more open to pay attention to or to listen to or for people to, get lost in. If you give someone all the answers, it doesn't leave much up to the imagination.
Yeah, right. No, that's true.
Everything that they're supposed to know, then, where's the mystery in that, or where's the, where's the thing that allows a listener to get their own thing out of it?
This is, you're touching on something here about that I want to dive into a little later with respect to your principles on your website for the label, because there's some really great things there, and I want to ask you about them. But first, I want to ask you about the label. I read somewhere that the label formed out of a bad deal you had personally with another record label, and you can tell me about that if you want. I don't really care. But what kind of things did you learn from that bad experience that has helped you in dealing with your own artists?
Yeah, at the time I was working at a label in New York City called Instinct Records.
Okay.
They were the label that launched Moby.
Oh, okay.
Just doing a lot of techno, and they were a semi-big American indie electronic label. And I was their art director out of college.
Wow.
And also recording for them. Sort of at the same time, they hired me as the art director and decided to sign a couple of projects of mine.
Oh, wow. That's nice.
So they were my life for a few years, 9 to 5 and creatively, and they owned me, pretty much. And there was a lot of great stuff that came out of that. I still talk to one of my old bosses, still keep in touch to this day. but I learned a lot of, things about how I wouldn't run a label, seeing how they ran the label.
Right.
And, while they were doing a lot of great things and letting us have really total freedom to do what we wanted, they were doing a lot of stuff that was, trying to be really commercial and
Sure.
Just things as a young, wannabe rebellious 20-year-old, that you don't want to, be commercial and don't want to fall into these kind of traps. So, I was there every day and I did enough stuff with them that I learned, first of all, I learned how to run a label. Yeah. And then I learned the parts about it that I liked and the parts about it I didn't like. And then at some point I had an album of mine that for some reason wasn't going to them. Maybe I was already at that point I was already out of my contracts with them.
Okay.
And had it all set with this label in California, and for some reason or another it fell through, and they didn't, despite us having a contract, they didn't put it out.
Okay.
And I wanted it out, so I said, well, what the hell, I'll start my own label. And basically using the knowledge I had from working at Instinct and the contacts I had and the, small fan base from my previous releases, I decided to just kind of start a little label for me and my friends and, really make it, at the time there was not, that I knew of, there wasn't any labels in America that were really the way I wanted them to be. Really kind of artistic driven and small and super
and this
experimental.
Is 1997, sorry?
Yeah, 97 is when I started the label. Yep.
Where did you come up with the name 12K? I mean, talk about a minimal name, 12K.com. That's such a great domain.
You don't know how many emails I get like every month of people wanting to buy that domain.
Oh, really?
And I think because it's so short,
Yeah, no kidding.
And
I want to ask you what it means. I have a guess, but I'm not sure. What does it mean?
Well, in 95 or 6, I forgot the exact release date. A friend of mine named Savis, who I've done a lot of collaborations with, we released an album under a project name called Arc, and the album name was 12K.
Okay.
And we got that name as we were sitting there staring at the finished album, wondering what to call it. And this is really not very romantic at all.
That's okay.
But back in the day, it was all MIDI files, so it was like sort of pre-digital audio for us.
Okay.
But all the file sizes of the MIDI files in the folder for the album were 12 kilobytes. So we'd have the name of the, if you're looking like a Mac folder window, you'd have the name of the MIDI file or the name of the song. We were using, I was using Digital Performer at the time. We may have done that one in Cubase or something, but you'd have the name of the file, and then off to the right in like the size column, it said 12K. And we just saw 12K, 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 and we're like, well, that's kind of a cool name. And, it's kind of technical, and it doesn't mean anything really. So let's use that. So we used that for the album. Then a couple years later, when I was looking for a label name, I kept going back to that as something that was, again, kind of technological sounding, short, easy to pronounce. It didn't mean anything in particular. It didn't have too much, it didn't have attached too many connotations. It was kind of mathematical, So
I was trying to figure it out. I thought it more had to do with like a frequency or something.
Well, that's the thing. Nowadays, so basically I asked Savis, I said, hey, do you mind if I use that for the label name? And he said, no, go ahead. So, but these days, considering my job as a mastering engineer and stuff like that, it kind of seems to make more sense that it would be kilohertz.
Right.
And no one, these days, no one really knows what a kilobyte is anymore anyway.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
But that's where it originated from. But really,
Wow.
I like to stress that it really has no meaning and it just kind of looks cool.
Sure.
And
yeah. Well, speaking of that, of the name and how long it's been around, you've built this following over the past 20 years. How did you build that fan base? I mean, it's to the point where, from what I've seen, we're talking about a dedicated fan base, and I think it's because it's such a niche genre. But when you first, I think you tweeted about an M. Greg record a year ago or a few years ago, and within that day, there was probably half a dozen records of his sold on Bandcamp just because you tweeted about it. And he messaged me and he was like, "Oh, did you see that Taylor Dupree retweeted my record?" I think it was maybe Still Lifes. And so you have this fan base, this following who treat you as their chief curator, so to speak. How did you build this fan base?
Yeah, I mean, hey, if I can sell 6 more records, that's something. I don't know. I mean, I don't know the extent of who knows or cares about what I do. Sometimes, but I think the only real answer I have to that is just 2 things: by loving it and by being dedicated to it.
Yeah.
Because I don't try that hard. I work my ass off, but I'm not.
Sure. Yeah.
I know what
you mean.
12K is the greatest label, and I'm promoting it every day and taking out ads in magazines, talking it up, and.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you: does this fan base allow you to avoid some of the traditional marketing around a release?
From day one, I didn't want to do any of that, and from day one till now, I don't want to have an office and a half dozen employees.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of there's good and there's bad to that. I mean, I want the label to stay small and just to be relaxed but dedicated and focused. But at the same time, I do have a responsibility to the artists on the label.
Yeah,
sure. I've never claimed to be able to make anyone a hit or a millionaire. And if they can use my label as a launching point to get on to something bigger, I feel like I've done my job. It's like,
that's great.
A lot of labels, would want to keep their artists, and of course I want to keep my artists, but I don't mind. I realize my own limitations, and
totally,
I can't offer big tour support or anything like. I don't do. That's not what I do. I mean, is the word you said earlier is sort of a curator, and that's what I feel like I'm good at doing. I'm good at curating some sort of quality of music and gathering up a whole bunch of like-minded people who've all become friends. And
I think what's great about what you do and what you're saying right now, and I've heard this a lot from other labels, is it starts with you being a fan of the music and you being a fan, not a business person first, but a fan of these artists, so that if something better comes along for them, for their career and for their music, that you support that. But ultimately you're a fan.
Yeah. And I mean, if I were a businessman, I'd, probably be doing a lot better than I am, but I'm not, and I'm not interested in that.
Yeah.
Because again, that, when you're 20 years old and, fuck the man and you just want to be a weird artist, that's what I'm still trying to do, by, just loving the music. And because I don't have to make a living doing it, because I have other things, mainly the mastering business, I've never looked at the label as my primary source of income. I was
That's
a
good.
graphic designer for 20 years and now a mastering engineer. So if you don't have to make a living with it and you don't have to meet certain quotas and bills and stuff like that, you can afford to be more experimental.
Yeah,
you know?
sure.
And
I talking about this genre over the past several decades, but I've been thinking a lot. I want to ask you about this, but I've been thinking a lot over the past year about how the new streaming landscape impacts the instrumental ambient music scene. I'm hoping that more and more people, and I've talked to M. Greg about this a little bit, and kind of my theory as to what I think could happen. But I'm hoping that more and more people can experience this genre now that they have access to everything through Spotify or Apple Music. In the old days, you had to budget to buy one record or two records on iTunes or a CD at the record store. And it was rare that you were able to afford to venture out into new genres. Have you seen ambient music moving into the mainstream at all because of how music distribution is now all inclusive for the listener?
I think, the last year it seems to be, I'm hearing about ambient music more.
Okay.
Some of the, bigger music reporting websites seem to be giving it a little more attention.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's because of Spotify or any of these things, I haven't bothered to
Right.
look at the data. I'm sure it partially is. I'm sure it's a lot of things. A lot of things contribute to it. But definitely one of the good things about all this streaming stuff is the access. But it's still, that's a big conversation, because the access is really still the access, people completely unaware of it, may hear it through a playlist on Spotify, but they're only going to hear those playlists that are like Spotify curated, like their sleep playlist or...
Yeah.
And these are big playlists with millions of followers. And if you can get some tracks on there, you can actually make enough money to buy a piece of gear or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's, but if you're not on those playlists, you're not making any money. And if I make a playlist of sleep music, which I have, and there's one up there, 33 people listen to it.
Right.
And those 33 people, I guarantee, are already fans of this music.
Right.
And
yeah.
But, you do get, if one of the 3 million people listening to the sleep playlist likes one of the artists and, takes the time to search for more stuff by them, that's, that's great. That's something you could never really do before.
Yeah, right. And you're right to say it is a bigger conversation. It's something we talk about on this podcast a lot, and it's still an unknown for everybody. And there's a lot. I think there's a lot to dislike, but then there are, if discovery is happening, then there's a lot to like about it.
Yeah, it's easy. It's really easy to say Spotify sucks and they don't pay any money.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's true in a lot of ways, but there are good things about it. I don't use it myself. I have a free account just so I can check on my artists' plays and stuff like that. But,
yeah, and Mike, M. Greg and I have talked about this a lot because he was the first time I had ever kind of ventured into this genre, and I'm hopeful, and I still am hopeful for ambient artists through playlisting, even if it is anonymously through some of these sleep playlists or study playlists or yoga or whatever. But I'm hopeful because before that, as much as 2 years ago, you would hit up blogs, and blogs just can't get the same traction on a 4-minute ambient track that they can on an indie rock track. And So it was always hard to get attention for some of this weirder experimental music. And so I'm hopeful that maybe playlists would be the way to reach people, or at the very least, even if they're not earning fans, they could be at least earning money.
Yeah, I mean, you do. It does all come down to the playlist, and then as a label or an artist, you have to start thinking about, what kind of, if you want to get on a playlist, then you have to say, well, today I'm going to write a song that's good for jogging.
Yeah, no, you're right.
And that
you're
sucks.
Totally
and
right.
No one in their right mind should ever do that. But I'm sure people are doing that. And
and it's not, there are opportunistic people, but at the same time, if you've ever had any success on a playlist, then it probably just gets into your head, and you can't ignore it when you're writing a song.
Yeah. But it's all, the playlisting thing is, I view it as just pure luck, because I'm not making songs for yoga or for something. So, I mean, there's an artist on 12K named Ralph Steinbruckel, and he does very minimalist, super electronic, sort of sine wave based melodic stuff, and he ended up on Spotify's sleep playlist. It's which is great, because his stuff is, it's not piano, which half the stuff is,
right,
and it's not, one of the more well-known ambient artists like Max Richter or Stars of the Lid or something like that. Right. And he was on there for a few months and got a few million streams, and
that's great.
I mean, you take it while you can get it, and then they're always sort of rotating in and out. So it was there for, I don't know, a few months, and then it was gone. But it's just kind of luck of the draw. Someone
totally
liked the track enough to put it on.
Before we move on from this, I love what you said. This is how I can tell that we are spirit brothers, because you said that if you earn a bunch of money from a playlist, that you'll buy a piece of gear. Yeah. Not food or clothing or supporting your kids, a piece of gear. I love that.
Yep. All the money pretty much goes back into the gear.
Yeah, I hear you. Which you have a great collection, and we can talk offline about that. I want to talk to you about the difference between, as we're talking about, this genre has been known, there is some stuff, piano music, and there's some more straightforward music, but I want to talk to you about the difference between music that is art and that noise that's just nonsense. I mean, as I've been exploring this genre more for myself, I'm naturally drawn to stuff that contains some sort of rhythm or melody, either present or buried within. And parts of this genre have been debated for the better part of a century as to what is art and what is just a madman making noises with his machines. But in your opinion, is there a line that separates music and noise? Do you have some sort of red line?
No, I don't, and I'd probably think it would be wrong or pompous, or I don't know if pompous is the right word, but of me to think that. Okay. Nor is it maybe that important. I mean, I'm trying to unravel my own thoughts here, but
sure.
From my own point of view, I consider myself an artist, and I consider my music art, right? And someone else, has a completely different idea of what's art or what's music, and they're going to have their own opinions on my music,
right?
So that's just me. So then you might have someone who makes crazy noise music, and if they think it's art, then who am I to say it is or isn't, or to say it's music? Or, I mean, I've had conversation with my dad, who may hear some crazy hip hop and say that that's not art, it's not even music.
Right.
Meanwhile, I love hip hop and think that some of the music in that genre is, completely out there in the best way, that you can be, and totally think it's art and music.
Yeah.
So, noise, music concrete and, all this stuff. It's all, for one thing, I think it's all music.
Right.
Which shouldn't be that much of a surprise to people, when I'm using like field recordings or the sounds of, I think nature is music. And so either I'm not the right person to answer that question, or I just don't think that it's just too personal people have their own, personal opinions of what is or isn't music or art.
Yeah, and I
there's
guess
no universal. What I'm saying is, I don't think there's a universal,
right?
Definition or rule.
And I think anytime there tries to be, or has been in the past, they said that in the 50s about rock and roll. They said that people were against the way that how people were moving away from Tin Pan Alley, and so it was. I think anytime that society has said no, that's noise, then we just end up evolving towards that and crossing that line, and there becomes a new line of what people won't accept.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
And it's just a question I've asked myself, because I explore so much into this, and I explore into tape loops and drone and field recordings, and there might be something that is not melodic at all, but it resonates with me, and it hits me in an emotional way, and so I just ask myself that question. I think you're right. It's subjective. It's not universal, but sometimes something comes on and I thought, my ears can't handle this. I'm not connecting with this in any way. So
and there's nothing wrong with that either.
Yeah.
I like my music on the more melodic side of things, and as opposed to rhythmic or noise. But yeah, again, if it's something you don't like or you just don't connect with it, nothing wrong with that. And
the weird thing is, there's been these moments in so many different records, either a rock record or an instrumental record, where something happens, either a mistake or a person talking or a guitar squeak, that just embeds itself into the record. And after listening to it for 10 years or so, it becomes as meaningful in that music as a guitar solo or as a chord change. It's just there, and it's part of the record.
Yeah.
The 12 principles on your website are incredible, and I'd recommend everyone to pause this right now and go to 12k.com and read these. But this is actually something that has never occurred to me as something that I should do, but I love it, and I'm going to steal some of them. But the first one is, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, don't tell listeners what they want to hear. Let them discover that for themselves. What does that mean?
Yeah, that came pretty much directly out of how I didn't want to run a record label.
Okay.
Basically about being a schmoozer or a talker, or, talking up the label and saying it's the greatest thing. Everyone should listen to it. It's just not me to do that kind of thing. And I think, let me back up by saying that with the label, my intention with the label from the beginning was to have it go for a very long time and go very slowly, and not to rush anything, not to worry too much about things. So from a long term, it was a long-term commitment. And there's no, I'd rather have less listeners who have, discovered it themselves and really connect with it than, a whole bunch of listeners who are on it for the flavor of the month,
Right.
Just in the long run.
That's totally true.
What are we in the end? if not, some kind of just trying to be genuine and trying to be honest.
Hmm.
So there's something beautiful in discovery, as anyone can attest to when you're,
walking in the woods and discover a really cool, I don't know, flower growing out of the dead leaves or something. It's just, there's something cool about discovering something yourself that touches you. That's nicer than if someone else said, "Hey, look at this cool flower over here. Come over and see it."
Yeah.
You
Totally. That's a great point. Yeah.
So it's just about, yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that the music that everyone is going to like the music that we release, but if you can find it and feel something for it, then that's valuable.
Another principle says simplicity, anti-design. What is anti-design?
That kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier about lack of decoration and flourish.
Right.
I mean, a lot of people over the years have talked to me about the design of the packaging for the label.
Yeah.
And I've had a very, the aesthetic has not changed very much, even though the music has. And since I've been a graphic designer for so many years, my graphic design philosophy is really just about simple shapes, simple typefaces, a lot of white space. Just try to make it. Yeah, just I don't know. It just I'm not sure that. I don't think my album covers are great design. They're just, it's kind of hard to explain. It's like there's designers out there who are great designers, but I think mine is just so simple that it can hardly be called graphic design. I don't know. It's just
right.
thing. That's why it's kind of,
it just gets out of the way.
Like, yeah, I don't want the design to get in the way of the music.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
I don't know. So something in there somewhere.
Yeah. Let's talk about mastering, because that's something that you do, and it's a company sort of separate on its own. And you own this mastering company. I've the pictures of the mastering suite. Is that part of your house? Is that like
It's a separate building.
Okay.
Yeah, studio used to be in my basement, but about 4 years ago, had the opportunity to build a building outside.
I got to pull it up again. So it's like, and because it has like a really, it has a huge window that you kind of look out behind your monitors. Is that right?
Yep.
That's really nice.
Yeah,
and you're in more of like a rural setting.
Yeah, I look out over the studio's floating about 10 feet off the ground. It's not anchored. I mean, it's anchored, obviously. It's not literally floating.
Is it a tree house?
Almost.
Oh my
But it's attached to our house, which is, it's attached to the second level of our house. There's 10 feet under the studio. There's a patio under the studio.
Okay.
But so it's high up in the air, and our house is on a hill as well. And the neighbors across the street are the whole kind of land slopes downwards. So even though I may only be kind of 10 feet off the ground, when you look out at the neighbor's house across the street, you're like way over their roof because their house is so much lower. So when you look out of and there's a kind of a mountain across the way, it's a nature preserve. You're kind of looking at the tops of the trees. So it feels like you're in a treehouse almost.
What are those monitors there? Is that a custom thing or?
No, it's a German company called Geitine.
Okay.
And I've heard them and used them over the years at a friend's studio in Tokyo. And friend and collaborator of mine, Ryuichi Sakamoto, who also uses them. And they were always sort of my holy grail of monitors.
Right.
But they're expensive. And I've had them now for three or 4 years. And there was a time 3 or 4 years ago when the euro really crashed.
Oh, okay.
And it was like 1-to-1 for the dollar, or maybe even a little less than the dollar. I forgot.
Oh, wow.
But I was like, because I'd always been thinking about these monitors. And you can only buy them from the guy who makes them in Germany.
Okay.
You can't go to Vintage King and buy them,
Sure.
or Sweetwater or something like that. So I emailed them and kind of dropped a few names of people that own them, that I've used, heard them on, and said, what's the best price you can give me? And he gave me basically a price I couldn't refuse.
Wow.
So
Good for you. That's great.
I had Barefoots before then. I sold my Barefoots to a friend of mine.
Oh, okay.
Little did I know shipping would be $1,500 and import taxes would be another $1,000.
Right.
But I had already committed at that point. So
maybe you could have flown over there cheaper. And
yeah, but I love them. They're very natural sounding.
Well, speaking of which, they have a natural wood finish. They kind of match the aesthetic of the room too, and the nature.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You can get. He builds them in various kinds of wood and finishes, and
oh, I see. Okay.
I've seen black ones. And
how did you get into that business? I mean, you were in an art director, and then you and a musician, and then started the label. Then how did that transition into mastering?
I mean, when I was of course always interested in sound and music, so that goes without saying, and always interested in the technical side of things, since I was 15 with my subscription to Keyboard Magazine, just drooling over gear, the gear bug hit me early on.
Yeah.
When I worked at the label in the 90s, they had me, because they knew I had the, technical, some sort of technical talent.
You were a nerd, you can say.
I was a nerd. They had me, the label did a lot of compilation releases.
Okay.
Like one a week. So they had me compile the compilations from their catalog and other things they were licensing and stuff. So they'd hand me like a pile of 15 CDs and want me to make like the master CDR for it. Now I wouldn't do these are all, commercially finished stuff. So what I do is basically do the sequencing and leveling. Right. And then occasionally maybe an EQ tweak, like a really broad, if one track was just way brighter than the rest or whatever.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And I didn't even really know what mastering was, or think that I was doing, mastering.
Yeah.
But, as it turns out, that's a big part of mastering is the sequencing, the, level matching. And fit. So I did that for a while. And when I had left working there and was, on my own at home as a freelance graphic designer, and the label was well underway. This was only maybe 10 or more years ago. It sort of occurred to me that the kind of music that I do and that my friends do and that we all do, that we really love sound and the quality of the sounds, because they're not pop tracks and they're not hooks and there's not vocals. It's all about the sound, like the sound design and the quality of sound is really important.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we're all doing everything in our bedrooms. So you may not have the best
interface or monitoring situation or whatever. So there's something, that I felt was either lacking or could be improved on. So I said, hey, why don't I'm kind of interested in this mastering thing. Why don't I buy a tube compressor and make everything sound better for me and my. So I bought a Manley Varimu, thinking that as soon as I ran anything through it, it would sound like $1 million.
Yeah.
And it did. It was nice, but it really didn't make that much of a difference.
Right.
So I'm scratching my chin and figuring out, well, there must be something else I need. So basically, like over the course of a year or something, or just kind of slowly figuring it out with the goal of making, my music sound better and my friends' music sound better.
Yeah.
Just started reading and learning as I went about this whole mastering thing. So it's, I realized, I need a better converter, so I'd get a better converter, and, I should probably get and it was all about the outboard. We were all doing music in our computers. I had no interest of adding any more computerized digital sound. I wanted to get it out and I was at the point in my career where I didn't want to buy gear that I knew I'd be selling in 5 years.
Yeah.
I didn't want kind of
heard that a lot.
gear anymore, unless it was something quirky and weird. I wanted to buy equipment that I knew I'd have, for a long time, and they would last.
Yeah.
Time. So I just started, I pick up an EQ. Then I realized after I had better converters and a couple good compressors, now things were actually starting to sound, really nice, and that there wasn't any magic piece of gear that instantly made things sound better. But if you, add all these things together, then it did indeed make a difference.
Right.
And
it's interesting that you, the problem that you were solving was this, bedroom recordings, and then bringing it up to making it a little more special, because that's what, and I wanted to ask you, the importance of mastering, because it's such a mystical part of the recording process. And we have a lot of listeners who are DIY musicians who do record on their laptops at home, or pieces of different studios, and maybe one track in a studio and a couple tracks at home. Why is it important for indie labels and for DIY artists to have their albums mastered?
Well, first of all, I'm incredibly grateful for all the clients that I get, because I'm really, really busy. And I just, lately I'm so far behind on my own music projects. And the clients I'm getting are, for the most part, small labels like myself, or artists without labels. And they're finding that, $400 or $500 in their shoestring budgets for mastering, which is something that even me as a label back in the day would never have done. Right. Because every penny counts when you're, just hardly making anything on a release. So I think, for these artists and labels who feel like mastering is important enough for them to put it in their budget. Now I've lost track of your original question.
Well, I was asking, why should they? I mean, I'm looking at your rates, and it's really fair. I mean, you're talking about, for a small EP, you give price breaks on 2 or more songs, and so for under $300, they can make a small EP, get it done mastered. But why should they? Why is it important for some of these homemade tracks?
Yeah, not to belittle what I do, but I don't think it's 100% necessary. I mean, I've released tracks of my own for years and years and years that were never mastered. And because I didn't know what mastering was. And when I did know what mastering was, I didn't want anyone else to touch my music.
Yeah.
Like, why should I give it to this stranger and have him do things? It's kind of like a control thing, like a control freak kind of thing.
Yeah.
But now that I'm know what it does and how important it is in the step of things. I mean, what an important step it is. There's a whole bunch of layers to it. I mean, probably the most important thing is simply to get another set of ears.
Yeah, I agree with that.
To hear it in what I learned in terms of buying all this equipment and stuff, that as I was getting started, I eventually realized no matter what equipment I had, if my monitors and room weren't good, then it was all kind of pointless anyway.
Okay.
So it's getting that another set of ears to hear it in a room that you trust, has been designed to sound, right.
Yeah.
And even if it's, even if a mastering engineer gets the record and says, hey, this hardly needs anything. I've had people, I haven't done that too much, but there's definitely jobs that have a much lighter mastering touch than others. Mm-hmm. And it's just some artists like that just for the peace of mind that, okay, they can more confidently get it out in the world knowing that it's, gone through another set of ears and kind of given the okay. Yeah. Another bit of it is, kind of translating to different playback systems.
Right.
And to me, that's the most important aspect of choosing monitors, is how well they translate around to other playback things. And I've had, countless clients tell me that their masters are sounding great, on their phones and in their studios and on their laptops and stuff like that. And, then you have sort of the, if the sort of the corrective aspect of it, where if a bedroom musician does not have a great monitoring situation, it's, there's a lot of mistakes or a lot of issues that can easily pop up in the low end.
Yeah.
A lot of phase issues. Now that there's so much vinyl being produced, most of my mastering is going for vinyl releases.
Wow.
And a lot, more than half of my clients don't even really know what it means to be out of phase or to have phase incoherence, and how that can, in the low end, how that can really mess up a vinyl cut.
Right.
So
yeah, that's right.
Maybe they send it out without mastering to a cutting engineer, and the cutting engineer comes back and says, hey, this is like totally out of phase. We need to do something about it.
Yeah.
It's going through a mastering engineer who already knows that and can already fix that. I've never once in all the records I've mastered have ever had a record come back from a cutting engineer.
Wow.
Saying that there's a problem.
And I think I like that. There are technical things, and it's been a mystical process for some artists because it has been so technical, and but I think that's one of the points. That's one of the points why it's important for artists to, if they can afford it, if it's in the budget, and if they find the right person that they want to work with. I think it's great, not only for another set of ears, and a set of ears that they admire and trust, I think, with you, but yeah, for someone to look over some of those technical things that most artists wouldn't know, or most indie labels wouldn't know to check, but actually could. If you're pressing to vinyl, I think it's if you're uploading to DistroKid the same day you record it, maybe not, but if you're pressing to vinyl, that's a very expensive process, and you want to make sure you do that right.
Yeah, and also, you said something that just triggered. Now I'm trying to remember what it was. Oh yeah, in terms of, a lot of people may, not know what mastering is, or not know if they need it. And I've had a lot of clients who come to they come to me and it's their first time, dealing with mastering, so they're not quite sure what to expect, and they thought they'd try it out, basically, which is great, that they're willing to go that extra step. And they get the master back and they're like, wow, like, I had no idea, sort of. Or
Yeah.
I'm hearing things in there that, that I didn't know were there, like in a good way, or you've corrected everything I thought, everything that I couldn't quite put my finger on, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And another thing I do for people is I'll always do a test master.
Okay.
Because I think even if you know what mastering is and you've had a million records mastered, you have to have a good rapport with a mastering engineer. And you have to feel comfortable that engineer understands and gets where you're coming from musically.
Right.
And if it's not a good match, if I'm not the right guy for the job, that's fine. I don't want somebody to use me because they feel like they have to, or they feel like, you have to use someone who you're comfortable with. And if I do a test master and you don't like it, no problem.
I'm not going to get mad. You need to find someone who you gel with.
Yeah.
For, whatever reason. And, I've also had people coming to me who've tried another mastering engineer who didn't get their music. Maybe they weren't used to, whatever weird experimental thing they were doing, and they felt like I might be better suited for it.
Right. Yeah. Well, I like that. I mean, that's what I would recommend, is finding a mastering engineer who's worked on records that you like and admire, or the type of records that you like and admire.
Yeah. And that being said, I mean, there is as you mentioned, there's a big technical side of mastering as well as the sort of artistic side.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done music. I don't just stick in my genre. I mean, I've done Christmas records and,
right.
Singer-songwriters and,
yeah.
I mean, I can do anything. Of course, I have an ear for, the more experimental things, but
Sure.
So
let me. I don't want to take any more of your time, but I wanted to ask you. I mean, we're talking about mastering now, and you've been running this label for over 20 years. You do the design on the label, and you're a musician that you haven't had time to work on your projects. Do you like having this variety? Do they all excite you equally, or one more than the other?
Yeah, they definitely. I mean, I guess if I had, in an ideal world, I would do nothing but sit at home writing music and making weird sounds all day.
Right.
But if that were actual reality, I'm not sure I could do that anyway. Just, I'm so used to doing different things, and it's exciting to do. I mean, if I had to be in here all day just writing music, I'd probably burn out like anybody else would, trying to.
It's nice to earn that time.
Yeah. And I, I'm fortunate enough that I've surrounded myself and made a living somehow by all these random little things that I love to do.
Yeah.
The mastering lately has been taking the majority of my time. But I love doing it, and I get to sit here in front of really cool gear all day long.
Yeah, that's great.
And
That's
when
awesome.
when the schedule starts to clear up a little, I find time to work on my own thing, and then it ramps back up. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, my parents were the same way. Neither of my parents put on a suit and went to work in the morning.
Oh, really?
They were.
What did they do?
They were antique dealers.
Oh, wow.
And my dad did a lot of landscape design. My mother my dad still does a little. The antiquing thing it changed a lot since eBay. But they were pretty, well-known hardcore antique dealers on the East Coast here, and my mom, but so they weren't put on suit people, and somehow that must have rubbed off on me because I don't own a suit, and the last time I wore a tie was when I got married. So
good for you.
And that's kind of the way I want it, and I just sort of made my own path and doing what I love, and fortunate enough that I can make a living doing it.
It's so amazing, man, and it's such an honor to talk to you today. Thank you so much for doing this. I just Tape Op recently did a piece on you, and they actually just started shipping their magazines to Canada, which you could never get them.
Oh, nice. Tape Op is so good.
But they only started this fall, and there was a mention of you in an issue that was just the issue before the issue I got, which has an interview with Daniel Lanois. But anyhow, I'll have to grab a copy of the July-August, because it has some photos, and anyone who's listening who has a copy of Tape Off has some great photos of your studio. What a beautiful
there's a couple
place.
Small ones.
I didn't realize you had such a modular collection there.
Yeah, that's
that's another episode.
That's a different episode. But yeah, I love Tape Op. I'm glad you can get it. Finally get it. To me, I read that magazine cover to cover, and I don't. Probably 90% of the people in every issue I've never heard of before.
Right.
And if I have heard of them, there's a 75% chance that I don't care for or listen to or know their music.
Right.
But I read it every interview cover to cover because it's all interesting.
Yeah.
And even if you're reading about some metal producer, you'll find things in their process that is like, wow, that's a really cool idea.
Yeah.
How can I use that for what I do? And it's really inspiring to read. Musicians are just really interesting people.
Agreed.
And whether they...
What's that big synth there? Is that a Jupiter or something? What?
Jupiter 8.
Jupiter 8. Oh my gosh.
My uncle gave me that years ago.
No way. Oh man. I wonder how many uncles are out there with old keyboards they want to get
he had he's a piano, he's a very good piano player, but back in the 70s and 80s, he got into electronic music and bought himself a Jupiter 8 and an 808 and a reel-to-reel recorder and a MC202.
Where did the 808 go?
Oh, it's here.
No way.
It's all here.
Oh my
I begged him for years. When I got into techno and stuff, I was like, oh, you have to give me that 808. He's like, it's in my closet. I don't know. I don't think I'll ever give it to you. I don't know.
And one year for Christmas, box, and there was the 808.
Oh man.
Then of course after that I was like, you have to give me that Jupiter 8. He's like, I'm never giving you the Jupiter 8. And years and years ago now.
Oh, that's great.
He gave it to me, and it's
Oh, I would love to do a studio tour with you sometime.
Yeah, I would love. I mean, as fellow gear geeks, if you're ever in New York, absolutely.
Yeah, you know what? I definitely would. I'm not sure. I have to talk to somebody about Canadians going down to the States for quasi business purposes, and if I would need a visa to shoot something. I mean, there's no money involved, but the border is such a tricky place. But
yeah,
I would love to.
You ever go to AES show, or ever any interest in going to the AES show?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to. Yeah, I could. Yeah,
because that's here in New York.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure I could find some other things to make the trip worth it. Yeah, I'm sure it would be fine because it's just bringing a camera and chatting. But anyway, it looks like such a gorgeous space.
Yeah, thank you. It's small. It's very small, but it's now I feel like it's too small.
Yeah,
probably just because I have too much equipment.
Right. But well, listen, you can pretend you're my uncle and give me some.
Yeah. But kind of like Tape Off is I love your studio tour series.
Oh, thank you.
Because it's the same thing. I don't know who these guys are.
Yeah.
They're probably recording music that I don't know. And they have equipment that I don't need, like, or use, like drum sets or like Mac collections. But it's so interesting.
Yeah.
You know, and
I agree.
I see how other people do it.
And I always come away from one of the tours, and we're talking about this separate from the podcast, but it's on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/othersongs. We have these studio tours where we talk with engineers and producers who don't often get much in the spotlight in the music industry. But I find no matter if it's a bedroom studio or it's a massive commercial studio, there's always, it's like you were saying about Tape Off, there's always a little tidbit that you pull away and you go, that's a great idea. Even if it's something as silly as plugging an iPhone charger into a power conditioner or something, it's just these little tricks that's like, that's a great idea. I should do that.
Right. Because there's, we're lucky to be in a line of work where there's no rules.
Yes.
And there's a million solutions to every single problem. And a million ways there's no right way to mic a drum kit, and there's no right way to record a synth, and everyone's going to do a little differently. So the more you can kind of soak in, the more you can, make informed decisions of your own when you're sitting there trying to do something.
Thanks so much for doing this, man. It's been awesome.
Yeah, thanks so much. Really a pleasure for me.
And thank you for listening. And thanks to Taylor for so many great insights. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. Please check out 12K at 12K.com. That release we were talking about at the very beginning by M. Greg is called Mount Carmel, and it's coming out in a couple of weeks. So look out for that. Please subscribe and share the podcast. You can email us at podcast@otherrecordlabels.com and visit us at otherrecordlabels.com. And on Twitter, it's @othersongs. And on Instagram, it's @othersongs or @otherrecordlabels. Thanks so much.